in Lambaster's red light district, where alcohol, women, and gambling flowed freely. Aiden stood at a distance, observing one of the clubs with a frown. That place belongs to Delia, he thought, recalling an awkward moment when she'd taken his arm and pressed her cheek against it. The memory filled him with mild displeasure, though he'd once hoped she might be different. Her tastes are rumored to be questionable. With a resigned sigh, Aiden pulled up his hood and turned away, deciding to search elsewhere for clues about Linza. Just then, a young girl carrying a basket bumped into him, spilling the basket's contents onto the ground. Aiden glanced down to see packs of cigarettes scattered everywhere. He watched as the girl scrambled to collect them, confusion flashing across his face. "Are you all right?" he asked. The girl, looking rather young, clenched her fists, offering a sincere apology, and his brows furrowed in puzzlement. "Why are you apologizing to me?" he asked, not quite understanding. As he gathered the cigarette packs and placed them back in her basket, he glanced up and asked gently, "Did you hurt yourself?" The girl seemed taken aback by his kindness, hesitating for a moment before reassuring him that she was fine. But suddenly, she placed her hands on the ground, prostrating herself in thanks. Startled, Aiden gestured for her to stop. "That's not necessary," he said, lifting the basket toward her. "Here, that's quite a few. Are you selling them?" Taking back her basket, the girl explained, "These are exquisite cigarettes from the Gray Merchant Union. Would you like to buy one?" With a serious expression, Aiden shook his head. "I don't smoke." He eyed the basket thoughtfully, his mind lingering on her mention of the Gray Merchant Union, a name he'd never heard before, his mind swirling with questions. The girl took the basket, bowing in gratitude. Cyan maintained his calm, studying her with mild curiosity. "Where do you usually sell these cigarettes?" he asked. Looking a bit nervous, the girl admitted, "In the alleys west of the red light district. If I'm lucky, I can sell everything by night's end and go home before sunrise." Her honesty struck him. "So she can only go home once the entire batch is sold," Cyan thought, his expression hardening slightly. Without another word, he took out a gold coin. "How about I buy the whole lot?" he offered. The girl's eyes widened in confusion, reminding him that he'd just told her he didn't smoke. Bending down, Cyan gently insisted, "Take it." He pulled out a second coin with a smile. "This one's for you." The girl's face lit up, her eyes filled with joy. Taking the coins, she handed over the basket, cheerfully saying goodbye as she walked off, waving and thanking him profusely. Cyan stood there silently, watching her disappear down the dimly lit street, then quietly incinerated the basket with his power. As the embers faded, Kira materialized beside him, her expression furious. "Why not start a charity then?" she asked coldly. Cyan closed his eyes, letting her question hang in the air. "The direction she's heading, it leads to the waste dump," he replied, a steely resolve in his tone. Kiram's anger shifted to confusion. "Why follow her?" she pressed. "Just watch," he murmured. A few moments later, they heard a commotion in the shadows ahead. Someone struck the girl, sending her small frame crashing to the ground. She groaned, clutching her side in pain. As she tried to crawl away, the gold coin Cyan had given her slipped from her pocket, gleaming in the dirt. The attacker, a familiar figure Cyan recognized as a criminal he'd dealt with before, glared down at her with a sneer. Seeing the coin, his eyes narrowed with fury. "So, you lied to us about having no money left?" As the thug cracked his fingers with a menacing grin, he glanced at the girl, sneering as he imagined her lying about the cigarettes too. The bald man behind him chuckled and encouraged him. "Teach her a good lesson." The thug advanced slowly, eyes gleaming with anger, ready to vent the rage simmering within him, spurred on by bitter memories of Simon. The girl cowered on the ground, covering her face as fear and tears filled her eyes. "Please, I didn't steal it. You have to believe me," she pleaded, her voice trembling. Suddenly, a calm, yet commanding voice cut through the night. Cyan, perched atop a pile of wooden debris, looked down on the scene and said, "She's asking you to believe her, yet you still won't stop?" The criminals froze as the familiar voice washed over them like a cold wave, shivers running down their spines. The two men at the back cowered, recognizing Cyan immediately, while the blonde thug clenched his fists, emboldened by Cyan's unexpected appearance at their base. With a defiant grin, he muttered to himself, "This time, I won't let my guard down." Just as the blonde thug prepared to make a move, Cyan leapt down, delivering a powerful kick straight to his face, sending him reeling backward. Without hesitation, Cyan moved like a shadow, striking the others one by one, his blows swift and merciless. The girl watched in awe as Cyan dispatched them in the blink of an eye, stunned by the sheer speed of his attacks. With all the criminals sprawled on the ground, Cyan approached the blonde thug, who lay groaning with bruises darkening his face. Cyan grasped his foot, lifting it with an iron grip. Panic flashed across the thug's eyes, and with a desperate, pleading look, he stammered, "Please, why are you doing this to us?" Cyan tilted his head, the hint of a smile crossing his face. "It's simple," he replied coolly. "I find joy in even the smallest things." He stared intently into the thug's eyes. "In torturing scum like you, well, I enjoy that a lot." With that, Cyan tightened his hold on the thug's leg, applying a bit more force until a sickening crack echoed through the air. The thug's face twisted in agony, and a scream tore from his throat. Cyan didn't flinch. He simply watched, unbothered, as the thug writhed in pain. Cyan quietly approached the girl, scooped up the golden coin from the ground, and remarked, "That guy won't be walking anytime soon." The girl, still shaken, looked up in surprise, grateful yet unsure, and as Cyan handed the coin back, he added with a smirk, "Maybe keep a tighter grip on this next time." With wide eyes, she thanked him sincerely. Just then, a slow clap broke through the silence. A man with stark white hair stepped forward, clapping with a sly grin plastered on his face. Cyan spun around, immediately alert, and eyed the man suspiciously. He didn't recognize him at first, but realized he needed to be cautious. The spell should have hidden his identity. This stranger was none other than Gunther Lictus. Gunther's smile widened as he scrutinized Cyan, his hand resting thoughtfully on his chin. "I wasn't entirely certain," Gunther mused, "but only one person moves with skill like that." His grin grew as he pointed at Cyan. "You must be Lemia's Simon." Gunther introduced himself, still clearly amused, as the owner of this part of town. Cyan's expression remained unreadable, calm as ever. He had questions, but now that Gunther was here, he shifted his focus from the man sprawled on the ground to this new opponent. Gunther glanced disdainfully at his battered subordinate lying nearby. "So, this was the idiot you thrashed last time?" With a flash of annoyance, he stepped on the man's head, pressing down until the life drained from him. His contemptuous expression didn't waver. The girl, witnessing this brutality, fell to the ground, her hands clamped over her face, shivering with horror as a scream escaped her lips. Cyan, unimpressed by Gunther's display, met his gaze and said coldly, "There was no need for that." But Gunther only laughed, unfazed. "Forgive me, I got a little carried away," he replied, wiping the stray blood from his cheek with his finger, then licking it off with a wild gleam in his eyes. "I've just come from a meeting with the owner of Lambaster's Cage," he said, savoring each word. "And you know, I've been hoping for a real fight with you." Upon hearing this, Cyan's eyes filled with rage. He realized this bastard knew Lenza Nyloff. Without wasting a second, Cyan launched a powerful kick at Gunther. Gunther, seeing the attack, looked somewhat surprised but quickly raised his elbow, successfully blocking Cyan's strike. His eyes lit up with excitement, and a smile crept onto his face. He hadn't expected Cyan's attack to carry so much weight. With a challenging grin, he asked if Cyan wanted a real fight now. Without answering, Cyan attacked again. Once more, Gunther blocked with his elbow, but this time the impact pushed him back several meters. Not willing to just defend anymore, Gunther tapped into his power. His fist transformed into solid rock. With a murderous look, he launched a powerful counterattack, throwing a punch straight at Cyan. Cyan narrowly dodged by leaping into the air, and Gunther's fist crashed into the ground, shattering it from the impact. As Cyan hovered above, he took in the sight. Gunther was destroying the very ground beneath them. Cyan wondered if Gunther had some kind of ability to enhance his strength. Meanwhile, Gunther yanked his fist out of the ground, turned around with an excited look, and smiled, clearly thrilled to skip the wait for their match. In a swift jump, Gunther closed the distance between them in an instant, saying, "You're better than I expected." He stared at Cyan with a sinister smile and demanded he keep entertaining him like this. A surge of worry filled Cyan's eyes as he realized this guy wasn't in his right mind. Gathering all his strength, Gunther struck Cyan hard in the chest, sending him hurtling toward the ground. Meanwhile, in a secluded part of the pocket dimension belonging to the god of black fog, pillars towered over a vast, eerie space. On one of these pillars sat Cica, deep in meditation, her body enveloped by an intense and powerful purple fog. Just then, a figure appeared. It was the god of black fog himself. He remarked, somewhat amused, that he knew she had assigned Cyan an interesting mission. Cica opened her eyes slowly, acknowledging his presence. With a calm demeanor, the god of black fog informed her that the individual Cyan was seeking wasn't even on the altar list. Cica's lips curled into a faint smile as she closed her eyes again. The god watched her intently, resting his hand under his chin, and commented that he hadn't expected her to involve Cyan in such personal matters. Cica's smile grew as she admitted she wasn't hiding her intentions. She then revealed that Lenza Nihilov was someone they would inevitably have to eliminate one day. Her eyes glimmered with a subtle thrill, and the fog around her thickened. She explained, still smiling, that she simply wanted to test Cyan, to see if he was worthy of becoming her successor. But just as she was about to finish, the god of black fog interrupted her, pointing a finger in her direction. With an intense, almost playful look, he questioned whether there was a chance Cyan might turn out like Lenza Nihilov, an intriguing enigma indeed. Cica returned his gaze and, with a cryptic smile, replied that they would soon find out. Destiny, after all, was never predictable. At that moment, back in the heat of battle, Cyan's body slammed into the ground with devastating force, fracturing the area around him. Yet, despite the impact, he stood back up, taking an offensive stance and glaring intently at Gunther. Gunther, noticing Cyan's resilience, seemed both impressed and thrilled to have found such a worthy opponent. With one hand on his waist, he cracked his neck with the other, grinning as he asked, "Shall we keep going?" Cyan remained silent, eyes locked on Gunther. Amused, Gunther continued staring at him, smiling as he mocked. "Go on. Keep up your gimmick, Lemius Simon."
The battle between Cyan and Gunther raged on, each blow from Gunther sending shockwaves through the ground, shattering the area around them. Cyan, undeterred, launched himself at Gunther, delivering a series of powerful kicks. Gunther deflected them with his silver fists, his movements swift and precise. As Cyan prepared a devastating punch, he suddenly demanded, "Where is Lenza Nihilov?" Gunther's expression hardened, his teeth gritting as he replied, "Why are you bringing up that woman now?" Suddenly, his eyes began to glow with an unnatural light. "Don't underestimate me," he roared, unleashing a massive attack. Cyan blocked the blow, but the force pushed him backward, forcing him to reassess. Why isn't his arm taking any damage from my attacks? Cyan thought as he steadied himself. Without pause, Gunther launched another ferocious strike. "Let's see you block this," he shouted. Cyan leaped out of the way just as the ground beneath Gunther exploded from the impact, landing on a higher wooden pillar. Gunther smirked, his teeth bared in a grim smile. "You're not bad. Actually, you're better than I anticipated." Cyan remained perched on the pillar, silently observing his opponent. Gunther, still grounded, shouted, "Come down. We're not done yet." In Cyan's mind, Kiram's voice echoed. "Should I step in now?" Cyan, hearing a faint noise, replied, "Wait, someone's here." Suddenly, a volley of assassin knives struck the ground in front of Gunther. A commanding voice rang out, "Stop this now." Gunther turned, irritation flaring into rage. "Who dares to interrupt? Do you want to die?" From the shadows emerged Lisa, her expression fierce and a knife clutched firmly in her hand. its tip aimed at Gunther. Two guards stood behind her, their presence underscoring her authority. Her voice was sharp and angry as she demanded, "Why are you attacking our esteemed customer?" Gunther jabbed a finger towards Cyan, frustration spilling over. "He started it." Lisa's eyes narrowed, her tone dripping with disdain. "That's nonsense," she snapped. Gunther, undeterred, retorted, "I'm serious. Why do you always blame me for everything?" Lisa's glare hardened. "Because you're always causing trouble wherever you go. It's not hard to believe this is your fault." Gunther's jaw clenched as her words hit home, but his frustration lingered, simmering just beneath the surface. Seeing Lisa and Gunther's dynamic, Cyan felt puzzled. Do they know each other well? He wondered. Without a word, Gunther turned away, slipping his hands into his pant pockets. "Whatever," he said to Lisa. "I'm leaving, but don't forget about my fight with that guy." Cyan watched, surprised by Gunther's compliance. "He's more obedient than he seemed earlier," Cyan mused. Cyan jumped down to the ground, his hands still in his pockets. Lisa noticed him and immediately asked, "Are you hurt anywhere?" "I'm fine," Cyan replied, his voice calm but firm. "But I'm very displeased." Lisa's expression shifted to one of alarm, and she quickly bowed her head. "Of course. You're a VIP customer, and we were supposed to take care of you," she said apologetically. Cyan observed her for a moment before asking, "Seems like you have a favor to ask of me?" Lisa froze, beads of sweat forming on her forehead. How did you guess that?" she stammered, her head still bowed. Cyan's gaze sharpened. "Gunther told me he met with the owner to arrange a fight with me. I don't mind, but—" He paused for a moment, then continued, "I have one condition." Lisa looked up, puzzled. "A condition?" Cyan turned his head toward a trembling little girl sitting nearby. "You have to give her a job," he said firmly. The girl, still frightened and sitting on the ground, glanced up in surprise. News of Cyan and Gunther's fight quickly spread through Lambaster. In one bustling corner of the city, two men discussed the rumors. "Did you hear the news?" one man asked. The other smirked, resting his hand under his chin. "Gunther Lictus is heading back to the cage, right? And he's fighting Simon of Lemia? I didn't think we'd see the garbage dump king in action again." The first man laughed. "That kid's Cy and must be in for some serious trouble now." Lambaster was alive with excitement, the upcoming match between Cyan and Gunther dominating conversations everywhere. For the next week, Cyan roamed the city, fighting in the infamous cage battles. In the process, he learned the rules that govern these brutal matches. In one such fight, Cyan stood in the ring, his opponent already staggering. With a powerful punch, Cyan sent him sprawling to the ground, unconscious. Dusting off his shirt, Cyan looked at the crowd and thought to himself, there are a few rules to the cage. He explained further, the first rule, no weapons of any kind. The second rule, if your opponent loses the will to fight back, you stop. And the third rule, you cannot kill your opponent, at least, that's the rule for now. As the crowd roared, the referee stepped into the center of the cage and announced with a crazed grin, "This match will be a no-rule match. The cage's owner has granted special permission." Cyan and Gunther stood facing each other. Gunther's arms were crossed, his demeanor confident, while Cyan stood casually with his hands in his pockets. Hearing the referee's announcement, Cyan frowned. "What? A no-rule match?" The referee chuckled, his grin widening. "Exactly what it sounds like. No rules." Cyan pointed to himself, incredulous. "But I wasn't told about this." Gunther's eyes gleamed with excitement as he uncrossed his arms. "You have no idea how long I've been waiting for this, Simon." He raised his hands, now equipped with metal knuckles. Cyan's eyes narrowed. "What? Where did you get those from?" Turning to the referee, he protested, "This is completely unfair." But before Cyan could finish, the referee had already vanished. "That damn bastard. When did he run off?" Cyan muttered, visibly irritated. From a distance, the referee shouted, "The match begins." High above the arena, hidden from view, the cage's owner observed the scene. Her eyes locked onto Cyan as she mused, "Let's see how skilled you really are, Simon of Lemia." Back in the cage, Gunther smirked, his excitement barely contained. "Didn't you know this would be a no-rule match?" he asked mockingly. "No, not at all," Cyan replied tersely, his annoyance evident. Gunther chuckled, and his arms hardened, turning to stone. "Then go grab a weapon if you're so afraid of me." Cyan sighed, his frustration mounting. "I'll do just fine without one." Without warning, a black and red fog began to swirl around Cyan's hands. In an instant, the fog enveloped his entire body, and his eyes turned a fiery red. A sinister aura filled the cage as Cyan spoke, his voice calm but laced with intent. "I have a plan in mind, after all. Let's start already." Gunther's smirk faded slightly as he clenched his stone fists. "Magic? Huh? Not bad. I was worried I might kill you too quickly." Cyan's gaze sharpened. "I don't recall this being a death match." Gunther laughed, his tone dripping with mockery. "You clearly haven't heard about me." A dark glint flickered in his eyes as he recalled his past. "I've come to learn just how sweet it is, the taste of killing a human." Hearing this, Cyan's expression hardened, his eyes darkening to a deeper red. "Is that so?" he said coldly, his voice heavy with disdain. Gunther's amusement turned to fury. His own eyes glowed a menacing red as he growled, "I'll gouge out those arrogant eyes of yours first." Gunther launched himself at Cyan with immense force, his stone fists ready to deliver a crushing blow. Cyan, however, remained motionless, his expression calm and unreadable. Just as Gunther's strike was about to connect, Cyan tilted his head slightly, allowing the attack to pass by harmlessly. In the blink of an eye, Kiram's blade materialized in Cyan's hand, its edge gleaming ominously. Moving faster than the eye could follow, Cyan countered, slashing through Gunther's arm in a single fluid motion. Gunther stumbled past Cyan, a moment of stunned silence hanging in the air. The crowd gasped collectively as Gunther cried out in agony, clutching the stump where his arm had been. "What just happened? Did anyone see that?" one man in the crowd exclaimed, his voice trembling with disbelief. Gunther fell to his knees, his face contorted with pain. His furious gaze locked onto Cyan. "You bastard," he snarled. "I won't forgive you for this." Cyan, his body radiating a sinister dark red fog, turned his piercing gaze toward Gunther. His voice was cold and unyielding. "Don't move," he warned, "or you really might die here." Gunther froze, his earlier bravado replaced by a mixture of fear and disbelief. His expression became emotionless, as though he had been completely subdued by Cyan's presence. The referee finally returned to the stage, his voice ringing out over the stunned crowd. "Gunther is silent, which means Simon of Lemia wins." The crowd erupted in chaos. "I've never seen a match like this," one man shouted, his voice filled with awe. "Gunther lost so miserably," another murmured. A man in the crowd, trembling, whispered to himself, "That black fog, and that mana. I'm certain that's the demonic blade." Sweat trickled down his face as his thoughts raced in fear and wonder. Later, Cyan walked down the steps from the cage, using a piece of cloth to wipe the dirt and sweat from his face. His mind was elsewhere, consumed by lingering doubts. "Someone made sure I didn't get the rules of the match beforehand," he thought. "Did Linza figure out what I'm trying to do here?" Before he could ponder further, the little girl he had helped earlier came running up to him, her eyes shining with excitement. She held a glass of water out to him and beamed. "That was so cool, Mr. Cyan." Cyan took the glass, his gaze softening as he looked at her. "Did you already start working here?" he asked, his tone more serious. The girl nodded enthusiastically. "Yes. Manager Lisa said I could start as an assistant." She paused, her smile widening. "Please be nice to me while you're here." Cyan glanced at her name badge and thought to himself, "So her name is Louise." He placed his hand gently on her head, giving her a small, encouraging pat. "All right," he said. "Work hard from now on." Louise smiled brightly and gave a small bow. "I will," she replied, her voice full of determination. As Cyan stood with Louise, Lisa's voice suddenly called out to him. He turned, his expression darkening as he thought, I'm going to scold her today for not telling me about the no-rule match. Lisa approached hurriedly, bowing deeply before Cyan could say a word. I'm so sorry, she said, her voice trembling with sincerity. Cyan blinked, momentarily thrown off. Even Louis, standing beside him, looked shocked. Cyan regained his composure and asked in a serious tone, "Why didn't you tell me today's match was going to be a no-rule match?" Lisa straightened slightly, her eyes wide with surprise. "I didn't hide it," she exclaimed. "The arrangement was made between the owner and Gunther. I had no idea about the rule change. I'm truly sorry. I should have checked everything beforehand." Cyan studied her for a moment, gauging her honesty. He finally stood up straight and said, "I want to meet the owner." Lisa's expression shifted to unease. "That's not possible. The owner of Lambaster Cage prefers to remain anonymous." Cyan frowned, deep in thought. "So this method won't work either," he mused. "All right," he said finally, "but you need to be more careful from now on." Lisa nodded earnestly. "I will. Thank you for understanding." Suddenly, a man approached, his demeanor polite yet firm. "Excuse me, do you have a moment?" Cyan turned to him, his gaze sharpening. "Who are you? I don't recall knowing you." The man bowed his head slightly in respect. "My name is Morris, a representative of the Gray Merchant Union." Cyan's expression remained cautious as Morris straightened, his eyes gleaming with excitement. He leaned closer, placing a hand to one side of his mouth as if sharing a secret. "I've come to see you because of the demonic sword you wield," he said, his tone growing more animated. A crazed smile spread across his face as his gaze flicked toward Cyan's side. "Would you be willing to sell that demonic sword to me?" Morris asked, his voice a mix of greed and desperation.
Cyan's gaze turned cold and piercing, his eyes glowing a menacing red. His voice dropped into a dangerously calm tone as he said to Morris, "I don't know what you're talking about." Still bowing, Morris didn't flinch. "There's no need to hide it from me," he insisted. "I'm the only one here who can recognize the demonic sword." Morris straightened and began to recount his story, his tone steady but edged with pride. "I used to work for the Albus Merchant Union under Zickerman Albus. That was until 2 years ago when he was assassinated. After his death, I left the Union and joined the Gray Merchant Union here in Lambaster." He took a step closer, his confidence growing. "My specialty is weapons, particularly swords of great power and rarity. Back in my time with the Albus Merchant Union, I supplied weapons to the Garum Association. I've spent years handling legendary blades and honing my expertise." Cyan remained silent, his expression unreadable, as Morris continued. "There's no one alive who knows more about weapons than I do," Morris declared, his voice swelling with excitement. "And today I saw it, the demonic sword of Dark Fog. That sword has waited centuries for its true master." His tone shifted, almost pleading. "Name your price, Mr. Simon. I'll pay any amount for that sword. Whatever you want, it's yours." Cyan's patience snapped. In a single fluid motion, he grabbed Morris by the neck and lifted him off the ground effortlessly. "Are you the only one who knows about it?" Cyan demanded, his grip tightening as Morris struggled. Morris gasped for air, his face turning pale. Please, Mr. Simon," he choked out, his voice filled with pain. Cyan's eyes narrowed further, the red glow intensifying. "If no one else knows about it, then that's good. I only need to get rid of you." Suddenly, shadows moved. 2 figures emerged silently from one side, and another seemed to materialize from the ground itself. All 3 assassins now surrounded Cyan, their movements deliberate and precise. "Let go of Mr. Morris if you value your life," one assassin demanded, his voice sharp and commanding. Cyan's gaze shifted toward them, his expression calm but lethal. A dark chuckle escaped his lips. "That's funny," he said coldly. Cyan's eyes burned brighter as he scanned the assassins. "Did you think you could stop me with these guys?" The assassins exchanged glances, their hands subtly reaching for their concealed weapons. Cyan's lips curled into a dangerous smirk as his thoughts turned inward. Sparnia's Shadow Assassin Squad, he mused. Morris must have learned from Zickerman's death and beefed up his security. It doesn't matter.
The tension in the room was palpable as the assassins closed in, their blades mere inches from Cyan's face. Unfazed, Cyan's grip on Morris's neck tightened further, drawing strangled gasps and a pitiful drool from the merchant's lips. Morris's face was slick with sweat as he clawed helplessly at Cyan's hand. "Do you really think these guys can save you before I snap your neck?" Cyan asked coldly, his voice a menacing growl. Morris weakly tried to pry Cyan's fingers away, but his efforts were futile. His voice was barely audible as he rasped, "Help! Help me!" The commotion drew the attention of Lisa and Louise. Lisa gasped in shock, her voice trembling as she called out, "Stop this at once!" Little Louise stood frozen, tears welling in her wide eyes. Lisa's resolve hardened as she drew her blade. "Let him go. Let's resolve this with words, or I'll have to use force." Cyan's red eyes flickered toward Louise, noticing her trembling form and the tears rolling down her cheeks. He scowled inwardly, his thoughts racing. This might pull Louise into something dangerous, and that's just annoying. With an exasperated sigh, Cyan released his grip on Morris's neck, letting the merchant collapse to the ground, gasping for air. "I'll spare you this time," Cyan muttered. "Screw off before I change my mind." Morris clutched his swollen neck, wincing in pain. One of the assassins leaned toward him and whispered, "What should we do, Mr. Morris?" Morris, trembling, managed to croak out, "Put away your weapons." He turned his gaze to Cyan, forcing a weak smile despite his pain. "You must be very upset because of me. I'll back off for now." But he straightened himself slightly, a flicker of his former boldness returning. "My offer still stands. Please think about it." With that, Morris signaled his assassins, and the group retreated, their footsteps echoing down the hall. Cyan's crimson eyes followed them until they were out of sight. As they vanished, Cyan's thoughts darkened. The Gray Merchant Union, a new organization born because of me, a consequence of killing Zickerman Albus. His musings were interrupted by a small voice. "Mr. Simon, are you all right?" Cyan turned to see Louise looking up at him, her tear-streaked face filled with concern. Her words tugged at something deep within him. He nodded and replied, "Yeah, I'm fine. But there were a bunch of scary people," Louise whispered, her voice trembling. Cyan crouched slightly and placed a reassuring hand on her head, gently patting it. Louise closed her eyes, the comforting gesture calming her. "Don't pay it any mind," he said softly. Standing back up, Cyan shifted his gaze to Lisa, who still held her blade, though her stance had relaxed. "Lisa, I have a favor to ask," he said, his tone turning serious. Lisa, startled by his sudden shift, stammered, "Why, yes? What is it?" Cyan's eyes glowed crimson again, their intensity making Lisa take a step back. "I want to meet the owner of Lambaster Cage." Lisa froze, her face pale, and a bead of sweat rolled down her temple. The scene shifts to Gunther, who is in a frenzy of rage, throwing and smashing objects around him. Three of his subordinates stand nearby, watching nervously. "Mr. Gunther, please calm down," one of them pleads. "You're going to reopen your wound if you keep this up." Gunther's face contorts with fury as he shouts, "Simon." His voice echoes in the junkyard, filled with frustration and hatred. Pacing furiously, he growls, "I need to kill him. If I don't kill him, I feel like I'll die instead." He pauses, his breathing ragged, and his thoughts drift back to the fight. His mind replays the moment when Cyan severed his arm with terrifying precision. The memory gnaws at him, filling him with a mixture of fear and humiliation. "I felt so powerless," he mutters to himself, sinking to his knees. He covers his face with one hand, his body trembling. How can I bring him down? I can't think of anything. I just can't." Suddenly, a sinister thought crosses his mind, and his eyes flash red. A wicked smile creeps across his face as he remembers Louise. "That kid," he whispers, his grin widening into a maniacal laugh. "I can bring Simon down using that little kid? Yes, I have an idea." That night, in the quiet hallways of the Lambaster Cage, Louise is busy picking up a stack of papers, her small frame moving carefully through the dimly lit corridor. She hums softly to herself to keep the silence at bay. Suddenly, the sound of a door creaking open startles her. She freezes, clutching the papers tightly. A customer at this hour? She wonders aloud, turning toward the sound. Standing in the doorway is none other than Gunther, his face twisted into a smirk. Louise's eyes widen in fear as she recognizes him. Sweat beads form on her forehead, and her hands tremble. "Welcome to the lambaster cage," she says hesitantly, her voice barely above a whisper. Gunther strides forward, his presence overwhelming. He stops in front of her, crouching slightly to meet her gaze. His hand rests on her head, making her flinch. "Do you remember me, kid?" he asks with a sinister smile. Louise nods, her trembling intensifying. "Why, yes," she stammers. Gunther's smile grows more menacing as he leans closer. "Good. Because I need your help." The scene shifts to Cyan and Lisa, who are deep in conversation. Cyan leans against the wall, his gaze sharp. "Why can't I meet the owner of the lambaster cage?" he demands. "Do I need to file an official complaint?" Lisa crosses her arms defensively, her tone resolute. "She's not someone you can meet so easily. It doesn't work that way." Cyan narrows his eyes, his voice dropping into a serious tone. "Why are you defending Lenza Nyloff so much?" Lisa's expression falters, her confusion evident. You know her name?" she asks, shocked. "I knew from the start you weren't an ordinary person, but how do you—" Cyan interrupts, his tone unrelenting. "That doesn't matter. Why is she watching me?" Lisa exhales slowly, choosing her words carefully. "The owner has been keeping an eye on you from the beginning. She's the one who permitted the fight with Gunther, and the one who changed the rules to make it a no-rule match." Lisa's voice trembles slightly as she warns Cyan. "Please, listen to me. You need to leave this place as soon as possible. If you don't, you might actually end up dead in lambaster." Cyan stands silent, deep in thought. Whose side is Lisa on? He wonders. Is she genuinely concerned for my safety, or is she just loyal to her job? Suddenly, a loud, piercing scream echoes through the hallways, interrupting their conversation. Cyan and Lisa freeze for a moment. "That voice," Lisa says, her face pale. "It's Louise. It's coming from the lobby." Without hesitation, they both sprint toward the lobby. When they arrive, the scene before them is chaos. The receptionist's table is smashed to pieces, and the wall behind it is severely damaged, with deep cracks running through the plaster. Lisa's hand instinctively flies to her mouth. Who could have done this? Cyan scans the area for clues. His sharp eyes catch something glinting on the ground. He kneels and picks it up, a small, familiar object. It's Louise's nameplate. Cyan's expression hardens as he slips the nameplate into his pocket. "I think I know who's behind this," he says grimly. Lisa steps forward, her voice laced with concern. "Wait, you can't just—" But Cyan cuts her off, his tone commanding and filled with fury. "I told you, I know who did this. Stay here, Lisa. I'll bring her back." The sheer intensity in his voice leaves Lisa stunned and silent as Cyan storms out of the building. In the dimly lit red light district of Lambaster, in a cluttered room filled with incomplete drawings of Cyan's face, Delkia lies sprawled on her bed, a look of melancholy on her face. The room is a mess, with sketches and torn papers scattered everywhere. Delkia stares blankly at the ceiling, her emotions a storm of frustration and longing. A male voice suddenly cuts through the silence. "A lady's room shouldn't be this messy." Delkia's eyes narrow, her tone venomous. "Who dares to enter my room without permission? Do you have a death wish?" Stepping out of the shadows is none other than Morris, a smug grin plastered on his face. "Delkia," he says mockingly, "you're a mess." Delkia remains on her bed, her expression shifting to disdain. "Morris? Why are you here?" Morris takes a few steps closer, examining the chaotic room with mild disgust. "Why else would a merchant visit someone?" "I've come with an offer." Delkia snorts, rolling her eyes. "I'm not interested in pigs." Unbothered, Morris picks up one of the sketches from the floor, studying it with amusement. "Still obsessing over the boy whose face you can't even properly recall? Huh?" Delkia's eyes flash with anger. What would you know about it? Morris waves her question off dismissively. I'll get straight to the point. Reaching into his pocket, he produces a small vial filled with a shimmering, dark liquid. This, Morris says, holding it up, is the most potent paralysis potion from the Garum Kingdom. With this, you can have him, body and soul. Delkia's eyes lock on the vial, curiosity and temptation flickering in her gaze. And what do you want in exchange? Morris's grin widens, exuding malice. I only need one thing, the item he possesses. You can have the rest, including his body. Delkia raises a skeptical brow. That's all you want? Morris nods, his smile never wavering. Yes, the rest is yours. Do we have a deal? Delkia stares at him for a moment.
Fine.
Morris turns to leave, satisfied. As he steps out of the room, his thoughts swirl with malicious intent. It doesn't matter who takes him down, Delkia, Gunther, or anyone else. I just need Simon out of the picture and that sword in my possession. He smirks to himself. For now, I'll trust Gunther to deal with the child. The rest will fall into place. The moon cast a pale light over the desolate junkyard, its eerie glow reflecting off piles of rusted metal and broken machinery. Gunther sat on an old trunk, his one remaining hand resting casually on his knee, a sinister grin stretching across his face. As Cyan stepped into view, his red eyes glowing faintly in the darkness, Gunther's smile widened. I've been waiting for you, Simon of Lemia, he said, his voice dripping with malice. Cyan's expression was cold and unwavering. What about the child you kidnapped? Without a word, Gunther reached into his pocket and flung something towards Cyan. The object landed at Cyan's feet with a sickening thud. Cyan's eyes widened in shock as he saw what it was. An ear, small and unmistakably human. Gunther let out a cruel laugh, his voice echoing through the empty junkyard. There.
A souvenir.
He patted the trunk beneath him with a mocking gesture. The rest of the kid is right here. Come and get it if you dare. Cyan's jaw clenched, and his hands curled into fists at his sides. His body began to emit a dark, swirling fog, a mix of black and crimson, growing thicker with each passing moment. His lips curled into a maniacal grin. Why didn't you tell me earlier that you wanted to die? Cyan said, his voice low and filled with murderous intent. The fog surrounding him pulsed, an oppressive aura radiating outward. Gunther, unfazed by the growing tension, let out a crazed laugh. From where his arm had been severed, something began to form. A grotesque, red substance oozed from the stump, reshaping itself into a crude but functional arm. And then he grinned wildly at Cyan. Yes, that's it. That's what I wanted. Show me the real Simon of Lemia.
That's all for today. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed this recap. If you'd like to see more manhwa recaps like this, please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to my channel. That way, you'll stay updated on all my future content. Until next time, take care.